Welcome all of you in the IMPAKT living room. We have an opening program in two parts, as some of you might know. Yesterday we had our opening at Casco Photodoc of the IMPAKT exhibition, which was very nice, very well visited. And now it's part two of the IMPAKT opening program, and now this is officially the festival opening. I'll be brief. We're having several guests tonight in the opening program. We will start with the official opening speech, after which our curators, Barbara Cueto and Bas Hendricks, will introduce the festival program to you. And after that, there will be a presentation of resident artist Beny Wagner. I think you all received the handouts. The exact information is there in the program. But first, for our opening speech, I would like to invite to the stage Kees Diepeveen, Deputy Mayor for Social Development and Cultural Policies. Please welcome him with a warm applause.
It's not accessible. Well, let me sit down in the living room then. Maybe this is a reflection of authenticity, or maybe it's a reflection of times when we didn't bother too much about authenticity, or it was not questioned in the way it is the coming days here during the festivals. So very interesting to sit here and to look at you all. IMPAKT Festival is one of the oldest festivals of the Netherlands in the field of audiovisual arts, film and media. It presents critical and creative views on actual social themes around developments in media and technology, as you all know. Always in close cooperation with many parties in the city, in the Netherlands and abroad. We as the city of Utrecht appreciate the fact that IMPAKT is an active player in our cultural scene in the city, besides her own activities like this festival. Therefore, IMPAKT has a unique place and a unique value for our city. That uniqueness, the way the festival combines arts with social themes, people, artists, it all kind of reflects the theme of this year, the theme authenticity. In its authenticity, the program of this year's festival is very diverse. It shows the many different ways you can look at and debate at this subject. To quote the website, authenticity is a variable and elusive concept that seems to be diminishing and at the same time getting more significant than ever. How can we gain insight into this paradox? What is the value of authenticity? The curators of this year's IMPAKT Festival, Barbara Cueto and Bas Hendricks, investigate the way in which artists, designers and theorists use these new strategies in their work. So I can't wait, and I'm sure you all can't wait, to discover the authenticity of the festival itself, the authenticity of its artists and that of our beautiful city, and the authenticity, not to mention the least, of ourselves, the public. I wish you all a very good festival. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kees Diepeveen, for your wonderful words on the festival. Before I give the stage to Bas and Barbara, our curators, I would like to extend a few thanks. Thanks for all the wonderful people that made this festival possible and that will be working very hard in the upcoming days. For production, there's Imke Ruigrok, Anne de Vries, Moritz Geremius, Julia Di Petro, Joost Mellink, Morgan Broen, Jessica Panopoulou, Lara Stolweg, Marina Papazian, Anina Jonker, Veerle Kollaert, Stijn van der Ziel, Ines de Co en Michael van Rosmalen. Please a warm applause for them. You might have noticed that we have a special publicity campaign this year. We've made 10,000 unique festival brochures, if I'm not mistaken, 7,000 unique program booklets. Every item that we printed has been hand-numbered. This is a concept that was conceived and thought of by our graphical designers, Hoax from Amsterdam, and please a warm applause for them too. And other people working on publicity were Laura Buys, Ines de Co, India Mazij and Jeroen Witjes. Please also applause for them. I would like to thank the IMPAKT board, but also Christine Breur, IMPAKT's head of management. I would like to thank our partners, Theater Kikker, Filmtheater Het Hoogt, Fotodoc, Casco, Centraal Museum, for hosting us. And I would like to thank our funders, Gemeente Utrecht, Stimuleringsfonds Creatieve Industrie, de Mondriaan Fund, Fonds 21, KF Heijn Fund, VSB Fonds en het Ventenen van Vlissingen Fonds. And our sponsors and partners, de HKU, ASU Advies en Management, MNH 3D Reverse, the iHotel. Please, a warm welcome for all these people without who this festival would not be possible. And now, without any further ado, please welcome Barbara Cueto and Bas Hendricks.
Is this working? Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to the second day of IMPAKT Festival. Yesterday we were opening the exhibition, and today we're kicking off the discursive program. And thank you all who came yesterday, and especially to all the volunteers who were helping us yesterday as well as today, who are making possible the whole festival, actually. So, as you might realize, this festival is about authenticity. And why are we thinking about authenticity when it's such a convoluted term that has been thoroughly researched throughout the years and through the centuries? So for us, it was really interesting thinking that authenticity have changed to more of a performative strategy, and it has more of a fluid character. So in marketing, we see that is constantly mentioned as a way to appeal to a crowd of coffee lovers, Airbnb dwellers. Yet in art, it's like enlarging and kind of expanding its boundaries, so to say, to encompass as well digital original copies or 3D printed heritage. So for us, when we think about this, like authenticity is changing because of the post-digital condition, which was, we call it this way as this messy and paradoxical condition that doesn't distinguish so much between the online and offline, and where digital technology is embedded into every single personal relation, labor condition, and aesthetic practice. So in the discursive program, we try to create kind of like a big umbrella where we could set a transdisciplinary approach with many artists, curators, but as well with researchers and fashion designers, like many people that could help to shed light into this new concept of authenticity. So from today, we have some 3 guest keynote speakers who are Chus Martinez, Bifo, and David Joselli, that will reflect more on a meta level of what is authenticity nowadays. As well, we have some panel discussions that reflect more upon the repercussions of authenticity more on at large. Firstly, how we consider ourselves in one that is called From the Self to the Selfie. The next one more on as a political gesture, and we call it filter bubble echo chamber. And finally, the understanding how it's been changing regarding an aesthetic practice, and it's called anti-authenticity. Besides that, we have 2 new models. One are a secret brunch, would take place every day in the mornings to kick off the program, and I will be in a secret location in an Airbnb. and we will be hosting some talks with some of the artists that are present at the festival. And then as well is called the other model is the lounge, which are kind of like a very informal talks where everyone is more than welcome to talk. And then we will be focusing one on more on pop culture, talking about series, fashion, and the next one is going to be more on technology on Sunday. So yeah,
Okay.
very.
Welcome all. In addition to all that, there is an exhibition which we curated. It opened yesterday, and it's on view here in Utrecht, in the city center, at the shared spaces of Fotodoc and Casco. And actually, the exhibition has a second venue this year, which is the Rietveld House, the model house, which is part of the Centraal Museum. And it's right across the street of the Rietveld Schreuder House. And this is that's a second exhibition venue with works by two artists, which are on view this week. The exhibition at Casco and Fotodoc is ongoing until November 6th, so that has a second week. And it will be open every day until 8 throughout the festival. So whenever you want to take a break, please go see the exhibition. It's at a 10-minute walking distance. The exhibition features a few new projects, one by Beny Wagner. There's new works by Elise van Maurik. There's projects by Oliver Laric, for which he 3D scanned an icon here in Domkerk. Furthermore, we had residencies, Beny Wagner, who I'll introduce later on, and Fireflies magazine. They are here today. Fireflies is a magazine, and they also curated the screenings program, which is called Portraits, for which they made a selection of movies by Ben Rivers and Pedro Costa. We're screening those here at Kikker and at Cinema Het Hoofd across the street. Their new magazine, which was produced partially during their residency here in Utrecht, is recently printed. It's ready, and we're launching that later tonight. It will also be for sale, so you can purchase a copy of the magazine here. What else? There's a work that we commissioned for the IMPAKT website by the Australian artist Benjamin Forster. This is a work that's called Signatures, and the source of the work is taken from a book from 1986, in which he found an appendix with 350 artist signatures, which he digitized and are now running across the website of IMPAKT, as if to say that each of the pages in the website is manually signed, but it's also in reference to new modes of authentication, which will be addressed in the festival, whereas the signature is, of course, the most well-known and has proved its value over the course of years. Of course, the festival has an afterlife too. We hope to reach new conclusions about what authenticity could be, perhaps establish a new definition even. And those will be published next year in a reader with collected essays that's going to be published with Wallis, and that will be out somewhere in the spring of 2017, and also concludes the festival, has some of the keynotes that will be reworked into essays for the book. So that's out next year. I already mentioned him. Beny Wagner is here tonight for an artist talk in which he will explain more about his work, which was created for IMPAKT. We invited him for a residency, and so he stayed here at IMPAKT in Utrecht in September and October and worked on a new project. You may have seen his work before at his talk at iFilm Museum earlier this year, or in the open studios at Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht, or abroad during his residency at Marseille. Also this year, it's been a very productive year. His work was in the Moscow Biennial for Young Art also this year. So things seem to be going well at this point. There's projects after the festival too in the Netherlands. Benny's staying a bit longer to work with Het Instituut in Amsterdam and has a show opening at Wrong next year. I'm going to invite you to the stage, Beny, and thank you. Warm applause for Beny.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me here, and thanks everyone for coming. And
Microphone.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. Terrible. Hello? Is it working? Okay. Yeah, and really thanks to Barbara and Baz for inviting me, and for the whole IMPAKT team for hosting me here. It's been really great. I'm really grateful for the time that I've spent here. I'm going to start by talking about some themes I've been working through recently. I'll show you some fragments from work I made this past year, and how this led to the work that I've made for IMPAKT, and see how these might relate to the notion of authenticity. Early this year, I exhibited 2 bodies of work that are actually quite different from each other, both formally but also thematically. They grew out of similar questions. I was thinking about borders and boundaries, and how physical spaces, landscape, or architecture reflect and construct the virtual boundaries of self. Yeah, that's better. The first work I'll show you is this installation that I called, obviously, This is a Girl's Apartment. These are some installation views. I had these vinyl prints on the windows, a piece I called Inner Circle. There was also a video also called, obviously, This is a Girl's Apartment, and a poster that a friend of mine made for me that says, "The smell of bread baking makes us kinder," and a spray bottle that contained the smell of fresh baked bread. That I ordered from an American company called Sensory Decisions. Once every half an hour, the exhibition attendant would walk in, pick up the bottle, and spray it through the room, and the smell was kind of equally very convincing, strangely, but also quite nauseating at the same time. In these pieces and in bringing them together, I was exploring what I perceive as a rapidly shifting reality surrounding both the physicality and the idea of the home. The home is a physical space with hard boundaries, but maybe even more significantly, an internal idea or a state of mind, a projection. In many cases, I think this abstracted projection can often be more powerful than the physical space itself. But I wanted to look at how these things are interwoven. Historically, the notion of the self is very closely related to the ownership of property. The human, the citizen, the individual, etc., are all tied up with the ownership of space. And there's a rich history of the self projected onto space, and what that means in terms of civil rights, for example. In A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf famously located the right of women to express themselves in the right to have a room explicitly devoted to that labor of expression. The walls of the physical space would expand the perimeter of possibilities for immaterial projection. So I was interested in this intersection between physical space and self-perception, and thereby the formation of what is understood as an individual. And I wanted to look at that through a present in which this reality of ownership, of having a room of one's own, has shifted so rapidly over the last decade. Oh, can we put that back down? Sorry. Shifted so rapidly over the last decade that there's this void that's opened between an understanding of the self that persists through language and habits and various social structures, contrasted with spaces defined by increasingly precarious terms of ownership. In many ways, this theme is quite personal to me since I spent my childhood moving between different countries and continents, and maybe because of that I've always lacked any sense of identity that relates to specific locations. Of course, most cultural laborers are traveling and moving all the time, which I think highlights a certain fragility in the association of the self with a specific landscape or nationality or whatever. At the same time, I'm always fascinated with the power of language and habit and an understanding of identity that persists regardless of whether the particular circumstances can accommodate that understanding.
and our neighbors. Actually, our neighbors are so quiet, you know, like we don't even feel that we have neighbors. But like our corridor, like outside the flat, it's so scary. It's because I'm that kind of person who is scared of everything. Like, so I'm like, oh my god, is it dangerous to stay here? Because it's just me and my boyfriend. Like, no, like we haven't seen tourists at all. But I think that's, I don't know. I think it's so much fun, isn't it? Like, and okay, so this is our bathroom.
So there's probably thousands of videos like this on YouTube of Airbnb guests walking through their host's home. There are various ways to read this type of document. I think one of the first relates to the invasion of privacy. But I want to move beyond the discussion about privacy because I see the general fixation on the theme of privacy as an increasingly desperate attempt to hold on to what I would say are now historical notions relating to the individual. I think that we're at a very hectic crossroads at the moment where technologies that were initially created to enhance individualism have outgrown themselves to become something very different. I think that these developments and their consequences are forcing a discussion surrounding the relationship to nationality, our relationship to the environment, our understanding of ourselves as a species, etc. But in many ways, I think the transformation of that type of language takes much longer than developments in technology, for example. For me, that gap was really present in watching these videos of people walking through other people's homes. If the home's interior functions as an extended representation of the self, in the past, that relationship of the individual to their space relied on the privacy created by the boundaries of that space. Here, those boundaries are perforated to the point of dissolving. Inside and outside have almost become irrelevant. But many of these people still have a very stable understanding of terms like tourist and local. The woman at the beginning hasn't seen any tourists yet. Maybe the Airbnb doesn't have a mirror in it. She's scared of what's outside the door while she publicly broadcasts a stranger's space without their consent. So these are all these overlapping and intersecting ways of positioning oneself in the environment that don't add up. They're just kind of left hanging there. I'm going to show you some raw footage that I ended up using in the video. If you want to see the video in full, you can see it online.
I've been here for an hour and a half now or so. Time for me to get to where I'm going, the Airbnb place. And I just wanted to show you, let's see here, one of the main reasons I got this cell phone and a smartphone is because it has a maps application on it. So it'll be much more difficult for me to get lost. Now in the Airbnb app, I just click that little dot and hit that again. It's going to take me to, that's the location of the apartment. It's going to take me to the Google Maps. I can see exactly where it is. And let's see, let's zoom out here. And it should also show me where I currently am. Yep. So that little blue guy right down there is where I am. Getting close. Kind of hard to see. Almost there. First time I've ever used this application or used the Google Maps to navigate. And I have to tell you, it is awesome. It rocks. Not 100% accurate, but pretty damn close. And it looks like this is the place. Looks pretty good. Neighborhood seems okay. Let's go up. This is the apartment I just got in. First impression, it's, I don't know, cute. Which, in apartment terms means a little bit smaller than I had thought that it would be. But otherwise, it's really nice, especially for Paris. This is the living room right here. You have the kitchen right there. You know, pretty typical for a European kitchen, just a couple burners and such. Hot water heater. So, there's one thing I noticed about this apartment, and I don't know, you judge for yourself, but let me ask you this. What's the most sacred place for any man? Obviously, wherever the toilet's located, where he's gonna take a crap. So you come home from a long day, hard work, and you just wanna relax, take a load off, and here, you're greeted with this. So you have to stare at that the whole time. Oh my god. I could not do that for more than a week. Hell, I can't even do it for more than a minute. I'm just gonna have to leave the door open. Obviously, this is a girl's apartment.
So I used parts of this footage for the video. Obviously, this is a girl's apartment. From all the videos I watched, I picked this one for a few reasons. I like that it was set a couple of years in the past. His smartphone is still a novelty, as is the Airbnb app, Google Maps, etc. So there's this something that feels kind of stupid, kind of pathetic, obvious about it. But then there's also this reminder of how much has changed in this very short time span of 5 years. But one of the things I guess I was most interested in was what I ended up using as the title was the ending. After showing the whole process of arriving at and going through a strange home in a strange country, using tools that completely reconfigure the terms of communication, travel, etc., this man is so convinced of the stability of his environment and therefore of himself, his identity as American, his gender as male, males like to shit, etc., that he takes offense at having to contaminate his eyes through the symbols classified as female. So there's this kind of really disconnect that I'm trying to kind of play with, I guess. Oh, sorry. I showed the video next to these vinyl prints. I found these images of animals licking windows on Tumblr at some point, and I knew I wanted to use them in this context of boundaries I was working through. A few years ago, I worked on a project that looked through various histories of glass and other industrial transparent materials, mostly trying to understand a transformation from a material, glass, that for most of its history was associated with mysticism, spiritual enlightenment, and the fragility of perception, to a standardized and rationalized agent of transparency. When I saw these images, I felt like they contained that contradiction in this one perfect gesture. The word window licker in English, mostly British English, is a derogatory term for mental illness. Supposedly, people with Down syndrome have been known to lick windows. I was curious about why licking this transparent barrier that separates inside from outside in very tricky ways would be so closely related to sanity or the lack thereof. So here they touch the boundary between exterior and interior with the interiors of their mouths. I wanted to destabilize the interior of the space and by extension the self. And to create a feeling that there's something unknown coming from outside, there's a threat. I chose these animals because they were part cute and not people, I guess. I chose these animals because they were part cute animal meme and part threat. Animals, especially as memes, are constantly used as proxies for human emotion, but then there are these very severe lines that separate the perceived us from the perceived other. So there's something unclear to me about how to read them. By reconfiguring this glass barrier of the space, the interior is opened, as is the self, as is the line describing me as human, as mentally healthy, as self-contained entity, as distinctly different from other animals. And of course, ultimately, beside the relationship to space, this is an issue of the projection of one's own fears or desires or insanity onto this projected idea of the other, whether that's a foreigner or a different species, etc.
Lick the window.
There's an on them.
Lick it, monkey. You know you want it. Lick the window, monkey. Monkey!
It's from a video I tried to make. That video hasn't worked yet, but yeah. Finally, there's the theme of bread. It's a well-known trick for real estate agents to bake bread in the oven before a viewing. The smell of to say bread baking is really a tongue twister. I can invite you to say that many times over. The smell of bread baking is supposed to make people feel like they already own the home. I've tried this myself before when I was offering a short-term sublet, and I think it actually works. But here the smell is produced artificially. And I like the idea that we could simulate all the symbols that constitute a stable environment without any of the supporting foundations, and it would still work. If we're not already there yet, the near future will definitely be defined by this type of sensory deception. Bread in this case is especially telling to me because it not only refers to the home, but to the greater infrastructure of agriculture that allows for the domestic environment to exist. Which leads me to the second body of work I showed earlier this year. This is a longer essay video I made called iFarm, which is about 20 minutes long, and I exhibited the video within this installation. I made this kind of seating arrangement using something like 250 stacks of hay. And here I extended my thoughts around boundaries to land, and more specifically to agriculture as the labor and ownership of the land. I became very interested in the ways in which wheat is represented today and how it's been represented in the past. And as I began looking into the theme, I became really fascinated by images like this, and images like this. And the way that I read these images, I mean, in some elusive way, they're making reference to the worship of fertility that was once embodied by deities such as the ancient Greek goddess Demeter. The video here on the left is free stock footage, and they called the .mov file "Free Girl in the Wheat Field." And somehow that said a lot to me about the current intersections between ecology, economy, and belief. And since she's free, I've actually seen her pop up in some other artists' work, which is great. Here again, I wanted to work with this gap between how language and social habits continue constructing representations of stability and continuity that are in actuality very far from the realities of industrialized agriculture. I was also fascinated by images like these beautiful sweeping landscapes filmed by drones. I felt like there was a kind of an inherent contradiction between this crop that for several millennia has been the symbol of the connection of the human to the land, and the fact that it's now being filmed by these disembodied, militarized eyes that aren't connected to any specific locality and are able to move freely over land boundaries. So a lot of the narrative in the film deals with what turns out to be this very rich history of representing wheat, starting from antiquity and leading to the present. And within that, I made some speculative associations between digestion, perception, and identity. I won't go too far into this project. I'll just show you one piece of footage that's most relevant to what I'm talking about and that I included towards the end of the film.
Peekaboo.
Jesus Christ.
As I was gathering material, I came across this video game called Farming Simulator. I found it fascinating that the first edition of this game was released in 2008, the year of the global financial collapse. So at this moment of collision between financial and ecological crisis, a game is released that lets players perform the most mundane types of labor. The game is really about money management. You can buy land, sponsored machinery, and labor, and decide how to best manage it. You plant seeds, you watch them grow, harvest them, ship them off, etc. And again, there's hours of footage on YouTube showing people playing the game as they narrate their moves and strategize together. And there's this one short sequence I came across that was completely captivating to me.
What the? Dismissed worker, he's still here. There, he's gone. I wonder how much he leached.
He did
wage
such
payment.
a bad job.
283 in wages.
Wow, and look at how terrible this looks.
The gap in there was me avoiding him when I was in that watering thing.
But look at all like the grass, there's still...
He's barely done.
He must have run out of seed.
Ah. And he just sits there, taking money. God damn it, these workers.
So what's happening is that the players have hired a laborer. They come back the next day and find that the task wasn't executed well. Of course, a labor created in this programmed space can only exist through their command. Unlike a real laborer, this one will never disobey or do anything he hasn't been explicitly commanded to do by the players. This video game labor definitely does not have its own will. And yet the two players unite. They essentially create a social body in turning him into the lazy other, the migrant, the incompetent laborer. The players occupying this seemingly stable digital landscape can't disconnect their politicized projections from this fictional simulated world. I see a parallel between these players and their obscene projections, their somewhat disturbing sense of stability, and the Airbnb man whose expert detective skills allow him to deduce he's been misplaced in a stranger's home whose gender he doesn't share. In both cases, I find there's something both awe-inspiring and terrifying about the capacity of the mind to accept simulated environments as real and at the same time believe that these environments were designed only for oneself. These are suspended realities we all occupy to some extent, and they're built mostly on the precarious abstraction of capital. This is a quote from a text called Energy and Experience, an essay in naftology, that transitions into the newer work I've been occupied with over the last months. The so-called Great Recession after 2008 has partially masked the energy crisis behind the financial crisis, which is real enough and has its own causes. However, behind the mask, economic growth is grinding to a halt when the automaton does not receive increasing energy inputs. The logic of economic growth does not function normally. The new state of exception means the return of some old truths in new guises. When growth ends, exploitation is again exploitation. The economic gains of one person are the economic loss of another. The analyses of 19th century Marxism and anarchism gain renewed relevance. So I'm going to talk about the background for the new video I made that's being shown at Casco right now. Sorry, at Photodoc. Confusing. I just finished the video last week, which makes it kind of hard for me to say exactly what it's about because it's still very new to me. But I can talk about the things that led me to what came out. After doing this work on agriculture, a friend of mine referred me to this text, which I found really powerful. And it began informing so much of my thoughts that I knew I wanted to work with it in some capacity. The text is essentially about oil, fossil fuels, but it approaches oil not so much from a political or an ecological perspective, but from a phenomenological or existential understanding. One of the author's main arguments is that philosophy has not taken account of the terms of energy as a driving force of human experience. It is not self-evident what one is thinking about when the topic is energy. Like the notions of force, will, work, and the sacred, energy seems to name at the same time something internal, immaterial, and spiritual, and something material, concrete, and physical. The authors make a compelling argument linking the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of our dependency on fossil fuels, with the death of God. But although we have no choice but to essentially worship the extraction of fossil fuels as our life source, the worship is embedded in a seemingly rationalized language which can only understand the environment as a resource for extraction. So there's no spiritual component to this reluctant worship, which in many ways has left that gap open to the various types of capitalism that shape our experience today. Oil is a great global unifier. Not only does it connect distant geographies and their resources, but it creates a common standard for those disparate things to be measured through a unifying energy currency. It turned the planet into a resource for extraction and turned its inhabitants into exchangeable commodities. But at the same time that oil brings things together, it also has the effect of distancing the environments that are most immediate. We don't know how electricity arrives in our sockets, or how water comes out of the faucet, or how devices are made, or where food comes from, etc., etc., etc. Of course, there are many ways to trace the details of these examples, and many people are invested in that. But the point is that our environments are constructed in obscurity, and that the labor of decoding them is anything but obvious. Entering the world, these domesticated environments are something like an obscure jungle, where deceptive forms and camouflaged energy can only be decoded through an impossibly vast pool of knowledge, far too vast for any single person to comprehend. This is a state of, the authors created the term condistancing for. Sorry, this is the last quote. When fossil fuels bind things together by keeping them separate, the consequences are similar to the consequences of modern division of labor. Focusing on separate tasks and expert knowledge creates efficiency and dumbs down, de-skills, and atomizes. In the same way, the work that fossil fuels perform, for instance, in internal combustion engines, makes society more efficient and renders the conditions and consequences of the gasoline in the tank invisible. Let us call the way in which the age of oil has brought things together by keeping them separate condistancing, meaning the particular way of keeping something close so that it at the same time stays alien at a distance. I wanted to somehow represent this state of being, which is an emotional state and it's a psychological state. I wanted to try to distance this from a political framework and focus on this as a state of consciousness, a state where proximity and distance are transitional aspects embedded in temporary moments of perception that are capable of switching places at any moment in time. I can't remember exactly why, honestly, but I came to camouflage as a way to visualize this dual relationship of proximity and distance of the self to the environment. There's kind of an obvious parallel. Oil is constantly camouflaging itself in the form of commodities and infrastructure. We know everything is produced and brought to us by oil, but we never see the actual substance. The only times we do is during a catastrophe, like when there's an oil spill, but for oil to work, it has to stay camouflaged within the infrastructure. Camouflage clothing has a strange dual relationship to the concept of nature. On the one hand, it begins from the premise that nature has already been dominated. The various forms of threat that used to lurk behind the foliage have already been tamed. This perceived lack of danger allows oneself to become the dangerous element within it. Nature has already been turned into its own image of serenity, and one hides one's own malicious intentions in that perceived serenity. The landscape here can only exist as projection. On the other hand, I also perceive this desire to be re-immersed in that nature, to dissolve into it, to blur the boundary that separates the human body from its environment. In this line of thought, I started thinking of camouflage uniforms as belonging more to the romantic sublime than anything else. And maybe the romantic sublime was a kind of militant nostalgia or an aggressive anthropomorphization and extraction of nature, and this, of course, from a position of moral superiority belonging to the so-called human. I realized that military camouflage and oil have histories that in some sense run in parallel. Of course, the principle of camouflage has been used both by humans and many other creatures and organisms forever. But the transformation of the standard military uniform into these patterns first happened in the late 19th century. World War II is the first war where all armies are issued camouflaged uniforms. World War I is also the first war that was powered by fossil fuels. It was a new type of warfare, completely redesigned through fossil fuels. I would say that the name World War refers back to the energy fueling it, the oil extracted from the earth, used to connect disparate geographies, which are now interlocked in a way that makes every part inevitably enmeshed in the war effort, whether in actual fighting or in resource extraction. This was interesting to me on several levels. The military up until that point had generally used very bold colors and shapes to distinguish military from civilian from environment. The intention of the military was to be seen and recognized as separate. So in this image on the right, we see an 18th century uniform, and everything about this uniform insists on its difference from the landscape it's in. And the image on the right, there's no distinction. The line between the soldier and the landscape he's in is deliberately obscured beyond recognition. There are volumes of theory as well as art that deal with how warfare is enmeshed and interwoven throughout the whole global or social fabric through technology, most importantly the internet and digital devices. That's very relevant to our current digital environment, but I'm interested in looking at this from an alternative perspective, an alternative historical timeline, one that relates directly to material and one that relates directly to the earth. Of course, the reading I'm presenting is just one of infinite possibilities. There are obviously many ways to approach this topic. But I was interested in how the individual and its source of energy, as well as worship, become fractured through the landscape. How this creates the constantly shifting displacement where the self becomes fractured through the landscape and vice versa. If the 18th century taught us that the human is the only animal that can comprehend its own death, the 21st century has taught us that the human is the only animal arrogant enough to name its own geological era. But this gained knowledge comes at the expense of geological death. There are many super intelligent people who claim to comprehend the enormity of this reality. In my case, it's completely outside of my scope of comprehension. When I try to think about it or inform myself, which I do a fair amount, everything gets muddled into an impossible abstraction. I end up being rerouted from the actual subject to the means that are used to describe and communicate such vast and abstract ideas. The means used to describe this geological reality are vast bodies of data, collected over longish, in geological time, a blip, but for us, longish periods of time, made legible through an overriding bureaucratic information structure. This bureaucracy allows the abstraction of apocalypse to be turned into statistical probability. At the same time, these statistics make a convincing argument that it's still within our grasp to alter the numerical inputs. Apocalypse can be avoided if we adjust the numbers. If we conserve this or replace that, the cumulative difference will make an impact. But on a day-to-day basis, the reality of those actions seem minuscule to the point of becoming ridiculous. And after the first round of statistics, there are more waves of statistics that confirm the ridiculousness. When California residents, for example, were asked to shower less in order to conserve water, it was calculated that over the course of a year, the water that would be saved would be the same as it takes to produce 2 burgers. So this is over the course of a year, showering less. These things are kind of completely incommensurate, but I'm fascinated at how we perceive this very quantifiable scale for these very, very different things. And in this sense, I see that as a product of a consciousness that's transformed through our energy sources. So this information bureaucracy is constantly shape-shifting through various forms of consciousness. The scale of climate change is too big, but the bureaucracy makes it seem legible. But the feeling of impending doom, of disorientation, of a lack of alternatives is incommensurate with these statistics. In my own inner world, these things coagulate. I'm left with an emotional feeling that the end is near, and this statistical data hovering on its own, looking for a host to analyze. This data bureaucracy turns to my own body. I can't stop the apocalypse, but I can somehow slow down the process of my own death if I adjust my habits, my diet, etc. And we manage to equate these things as if it were obvious that they belong to each other. Our diets reflect the emissions of greenhouse gases or whatever. But there is so much abstraction in that equation, such an impossible distance between my actions and what's understood as the greater whole. So this is kind of the background of my thoughts that led to the video that I made. Through the process of working, I think it became something very different than what I set out to make. Also, this video is a product of a shift I'm also going through in my own practice. In previous work, I've tried to communicate the ideas that I'm working with through different kinds of descriptive narrative. And I started feeling like this mode of working had various shortcomings in terms of making art. And so I wanted to start making things that are more impulsive, more emotionally charged, creating certain states of experience rather than describing them. This is like very basic advice you get in first year film school. I probably should have gone to this film school. I didn't, so I'm kind of in the process of learning. When I started conceiving the piece, even before I had the images clearly formulated, I knew I wanted to use Sade's song, I Miss You Like the Deserts Miss the Rain. I like this song for many reasons. First of all, it projects heartbreak onto the environment. Emotions are somehow interwoven into the landscape, projected onto the environment. But what's also great about combining these two things, the desert and the rain, is that they're completely incommensurate. The desert doesn't know the rain. How does the desert miss something that it doesn't know? A person walking through the desert would be thirsty and would want rain, but the desert is the desert, right? So it conveys the sense of loss for something one never knew to begin with. And that described what I was trying to get at really well on an emotional level, what I wanted to convey through the video. So these, I'm not going to show any of the, but you should all go see it. It's looping for the next 2 weeks. Yeah, I think 2 weeks. These are some stills, though. Yeah, so there's this process of displacement that I'm trying to get at, where all these elements take on anthropomorphized attributes and are constantly shape-shifting. In the video, I wanted to travel through this process of displacement. The landscape becomes the loss of self. The dying chimpanzee becomes the possibility, perhaps, of finding oneself again, but in a form that will only ever remain distant projection. It will never materialize. Death lurks behind every image and word. It's embedded in every material, but has no way of showing its face. The video begins and ends with death as the prerequisite for everything else, and at the same time, the thing that's beyond representation. I think the things that are most interesting to me are the things that are impossible to represent. This puts me in a difficult position as an artist because I'm always struggling with how to give these perceived invisible process a visible form. That's kind of always the challenge that I'm faced with. Finally, authenticity. When I was trying to think about authenticity, it occurred to me that authenticity has something to do with the notion of a whole, that the form something takes corresponds truthfully to the content that it's a vessel for. In the immersive and violent course of capitalism over the last century, I think authenticity went through a shift from implying certain features in a person, such as integrity, to meaning something more like authentication, as in making sure the commodity isn't making false claims. And this applies to people as well as it applies to things, and these are all kind of put on a level playing field in a lot of ways. While authenticity and authentication might be connected, the gap between them completely changes projections and expectations of the world and the beings in it. I see authenticity somewhere at the crossroads of European Enlightenment, Protestant work ethic, psychoanalysis, advertising, a term that would somehow require the belief that forms are stable, that there is a true self, that the landscape is the image we've made of it. For me, these terms are totally fractured and perpetually shape-shifting, and I can't find anywhere to place authenticity within that. I chose to bring up this image of Justin Trudeau, the current Prime Minister of Canada, because I think he kind of embodies the impossibility of authenticity within our current realities. He's kind of this bleeding heart of our liberal values, and we're expected to rejoice that someone so kind is in power. And I think he means well. It's like actually kind of unclear to me, but I think he means well. But I also think he's a testament to the gap between the liberal environments we'd like to believe in and this kind of brutal void of the socioeconomic structures that these belief systems are resting on. Here I've thrown him into my cast of displaced characters, from the Airbnb guy to the virtual labor. I think he's definitely in that family of people. Of course, authenticity still holds this grip on artistic practices despite over a century of moves away from it. I think this is probably mostly a result of art markets and the need for authentication processes. That's also something I can't really personally relate to, since my practice exists in large part, as you've seen, in appropriating and sourcing my material from the world. And that's not a statement. I don't think I'm making a statement in that. It's just one of many modes of working. But I thought I would end with a short clip from a video by the artist Steve Ranke, who I think was here, Iron can correct me if I'm wrong, 2 years ago? Several times, yeah. I really admire his work. I think he makes really great videos. They're all on his Vimeo channel. You can see them. He's really generous with them. And this is, to me, a beautiful and hilarious way to think about the potential for non-authenticities in the future of art.
I like Smithson fine. Some of his work is kind of interesting. I don't have any urge to banish it from the world, say. Yet it does seem to me that he is annoyingly overrated, that at core the work is coy and bratty and kind of brittle, that it could crack under the weight of its underdeveloped and preposterous conceptual glaze. I need to get away from Smithson and his boyish pretensions in order to look at the work in a new way. The death of the author is fine for writers. Writers never really have a life off the page anyway. But there is no corresponding death of the artist. That stack of felt over in the corner, it only has meaning because of Joseph Beuys. Godlike, magically imbued it with value and significance. If we remove him, very little is left. So it won't really work to consider Spiral Jetty as just a thing in the world, as a work independent of its author. We must see it in the larger context of Smithson's writings, his drawings, other earthworks, etc. We must become more active and creative in terms of art and authorship. For starters, I propose the creation of a hybrid artist, Smithson-Mapplethorpe. If we collect the works of Roberts, Mapplethorpe, and Smithson and consider them as the work of a single artist, we suddenly have an oeuvre much more interesting and significant than their separate bodies of work. Whole new possibilities open up, and not just for academic scholarship.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Beny. Maneuvering through furniture. Yeah, my first question. I've seen the work in the exhibition, of course, and it seems like there's a lot of thought went into this, and also there's probably a lot of ideas that could lead to future works. And I will not ask you to predict any future works, but I am interested in what you refer to of the artistic process during your residency, because of course you come with a set of expectations of what the work will be like and what will you be producing. But then of course there is a limited time frame of 2 months only, and I was interested to know how the work evolves and how has it changed in relation to the ideas you've started it off with.
Well, I think in terms of this shift that I was describing, kind of removing the narrative content from what I'm doing, that is something that I wanted to be exploring. I don't know, maybe in the last half year it became clear to me that I wanted to shift more into that space. And I mean, essentially the way that it changed is from when I started working on it to now that it's being shown. Our kind of formal considerations. I had done some sketches before shooting the material, and I had some ideas of how I wanted to put the whole thing together and the elements that I wanted to use, like the song, for example. But as soon as you kind of start working with the actual material, that all turns out to be like impossible or something. So so I kind of tried working on that the way that I had thought about it, and then I just didn't feel like it was working, and so I just had to kind of experiment with things. I threw a lot of things out, for example. I kind of had to separate my intentions from the integrity of the piece as an autonomous object. And I think that's also a big step for me, because I had a hard time separating my intentions in the past. Yeah.
Something else I wanted to ask you about was the first work, the Airbnb work. Obviously, this is a girl's apartment. We've talked about this also in a previous event last week of how Airbnb relates to processes of gentrification, for instance. And usually, and this is also in reference to what you said about how your work is related to boundaries, both soft and hard. And I was thinking that, like, of course, Airbnb is this example of a business that commodifies this experience of authenticity, and it does lead to processes of urban gentrification. But I was wondering, to which extent do you think it also capitalizes or sort of gentrifies our personal spaces and our digital spaces?
Like our like self-perception or something.
Exactly.
I think it does that enormously, and I think it does that to an extent that I mean, of course, it's not just Airbnb. I mean, I think it's digital technology as a whole. It's the economic factors. It's our relationship to the environment right now. Our kind of acknowledgement, unanimous acknowledgement that we've kind of come to this end point. All these things are completely reconfiguring. Who we are as a species, and I've become increasingly over the last couple of years influenced and inspired by various post-humanist voices, and you know, I think that's of the kind of material that I've been exposed to, that I've read in the past. I think it's kind of the most viable form of moving forward, is to reconstruct this notion of the human and get rid of all the baggage that this entails. The violence of humanism or something.
When talking about post-humanism, the physical and the virtual are clearly linked and related, and your new work also like addresses this level of detachment and displacement, and you do that by means of oil in this in the instance of the new work, and it led me to think of our use of natural resources. Like in this work, it's fossil fuel, but I was also thinking like the natural elements such as water, which are used for air conditioning, for instance, and of course oil is a more abstract or invisible resource, but I mean, it's not just oil, so I was wondering how you think it's related to the other resources.
To other resources, it's interesting. Because I mean, and I think that's also interesting, like in the American elections, for example, that it's like not a question anymore with the oil industry. That's a fascinating shift from even 4 years ago. How it really, I mean, so I started reading a lot of texts about oil. There's also Reza Negarstani's Cyclonopedia, there was an idea that I liked very much, that that oil is maybe it has its own consciousness, and that it has this kind of cosmic planetary consciousness, and it was simply waiting for a host, which would be our species, and that it would like unleash itself for this like very short span of time. And I like thinking about it in that sense. He talks a lot about how oil is a state of decay, and how decay is a state of growth that's neither life nor death, but it expands in that sense. And I like thinking about it on this very abstract level. In terms of a shift to new natural resources, yeah, I mean, we definitely haven't transitioned into an understanding of our environments as not something explicitly made for our own extraction. Yeah. That is not happening on the landscape in terms of how I see it, except for kind of with few far and in between voices, a lot of which are active in the art world. I think it's like a very healthy and thriving discussion that's happening, and I kind of feel like I want to participate in that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask if there's questions from the audience for Beny. Portable mics present. Well, in that case, then maybe as a final question, could you introduce your next project for Het Instituut a bit, maybe, because it's going to be in Amsterdam and you'll be working on that from November on, from December on.
Yeah, sure. I think it's. I've done a lot of pre-work on it. I haven't done actually any physical work, but I think in some ways it ties a lot of the things together that I've been working through over the last years, which are kind of the politics of vision and the influence of language on the ability to see things. And at a certain point, I can't remember, someone told me that about the origin of the word obscene, that it comes from the ancient Greek obskena, which translated directly into offstage. And so it embodied this belief among ancient Greek dramatists that you don't represent violence visually, but that happens through other theatrical devices. So if there's a murder or a rape, you don't see that happening on stage. And I was kind of fascinated by how, like, through centuries of theater and then also film, that principle stays very much intact. And then there's a radical shift in the depiction of graphic violence. Kind of in the 1980s, it coincides with home viewership, so private viewership. Mm-hmm. So somehow the depiction of violence in the way that I'm investigating it has something to do with the cohesion of the social body gathering in like a theater, and yeah, and then specifically, so I'm working on this in like a few different variations, but for Het Instituut, one of the things for the research, the requirements for the research is that it collaborate with something that's outside of the art world, which I kind of like. And I decided to design this workshop together with students of criminal law. And I was interested in that because I thought that they had a certain kind of relationship to the obscene, and also an interesting approach to narrative devices, because on the one hand, in criminal law, you have to use facts, you have to very diligently like stick to facts, but at the same time it's about like how you tell this story, and it's about how you use the facts to your advantage. And yeah, so that I think, so yeah, I still don't know exactly what form it's going to take, but that's the basic, yeah.
One project at a time, of course. If there's no further questions, Beny's work is at Photodoc, and it's running until 8 tonight, so that would also still be possible to go see that today, now in the break, because we'll be back here at 8 with Chus Martinez. Thank you, Beny.
Thanks.
Thank you.